Okay, here's a brief word on what Southern society looked like during Reconstruction. And in order to understand it, we need to go back to pre-Civil War times. And during this time, there was a clear social order to Southern society. At the very top, you had the Southern aristocracy, which were the very wealthy landowners and planters. They consisted of the patriarch, who was the father, the matriarch, their children, and then sometimes hundreds of slaves that fell within their domain. Then below them you had the middle class farmer who usually owned 1 to 3 slaves, sometimes a little more, sometimes none. And then below them you had the tenant farmer, who's usually white, and then below them you had the slaves. So within the Southern aristocracy, though, this is a very key point to understand Southern society. The patriarch controlled and considered himself the owner of everything, not just the land and the house and all the possessions, but also the people within his domain. That meant his wife, children, and slaves. And when I say owned them, that meant he controlled every aspect of their lives, or at least he thought he did. Um, and in regards to slaves, this meant he controlled their bodies. That's why you had the auction block, right, which was a way of reinforcing this ownership. Whipping and beatings were also a way to reinforce this ownership. And unfortunately, within with regards to female slaves, rape was another way of reinforcing this ownership. So slave owners not only controlled their possessions, they also controlled the bodies of their slaves. Now, after the Civil War, they were reluctant to give that ownership up. They wanted to maintain control because that was the way society was organized. That was the social order. And so that's when you started to see numerous abuses from vigilante groups like the Ku Klux Klan, who used rape as a weapon of ownership and terror in order to remind African Americans that they did not control their own bodies. And we'll see this again throughout the course, especially later on in the 1950s and 1960s when we talk about the civil rights era. So keep this in mind. It's very important.